Today we have Howard here from Ylopo. We've got Ethan from Follow Up Boss, and we are talking to what we know are two of the top and best experts on what is going on with the real estate commission lawsuits and everything that's going on legally in our industry. This webinar sort of brought to you by Ylopo and Follow Up Boss. The design here is to add as much value to our community as possible to get you guys up to speed, in the know on what's going on, where we've been, where we're going. And independently, Ethan and I independently listened to the amazing podcast that James and Keith have called Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered. And, we read a lot of articles. Ethan and I read a lot of articles. We see a lot of podcasts. And independently, we came to the conclusion after seeing their podcasts on what's going on with the real estate commission lawsuits, it was singularly the most informative, most intelligent, and true to its name, unfiltered, no bullshit, discussion and take, and some fun along the way, right, of what's happening. So we thought that it would be, Ethan and I thought that it would be really cool to bring it to our community, bring in these experts, we're really excited to have you guys, James and Keith. Ethan, anything to add to that preamble?
No, that was a really good setup there. It was the single best piece of content I consumed on a topic that's important to all of us, and for a specific reason that will be delivered on today as well, which is that it's not just a news update. It's not just context. It's also actionable advice as well. So excited to get into it.
Yeah, that's a really, really great point. So there's going to be a lot of actionable, tangible takeaways that will be delivered. It will be delivered a little bit later on in the webinar because we've kind of got to get into the history and all that kind of stuff. So hang in there. Don't go anywhere, because if you leave, you're actually going to miss some really concrete stuff that we know will help you earn more dollars in 24 and 25 and be really better prepared. So having said that, I want to say hello again to James and Keith. And really just want to start with, if you could give our audience a little bit, because I know a lot of people know you guys, but not everybody, a little bit of background on who you guys are and how you came to be such incredible experts on this topic.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Howard and Ethan. I don't think Keith and I try not to classify ourselves as experts. I will say we probably have educated ourselves more than most on these topics. And, I think the first thing I'll say is we're not your lawyers. So just for clarity, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff today.
And we're not your broker of record. So
yeah.
We talk about how to do your business with regards to these changes. Don't listen to us then either. Now go ahead, James, continue.
Yeah, thank you. But we've been investigating these lawsuits since they've occurred. Actually, even further back, when the Department of Justice opened up its first its joint hearing on residential real estate in 2018. I will say the information we're going to share with you is from a lot of different people. I want to give credit to Ed Zorn, Rob Hahn, others who have been helping us through this process for years. And we're kind of, I guess, sort of the microphone of a lot of ideas and feedback consolidated into Keith's and our simple version of explaining this stuff that the rest of us can understand. So I'll start, I guess, Howard, with just explaining sort of where we are today. And I think the context is important on how did we get to this? And then I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. We'll talk about sort of the current status of the suits and then essentially where we're headed, which we think we've got a pretty good grasp on that as well. So I'll do this somewhat quick, so I don't want to bore everybody with every single detail, but about every 10 years, the Department of Justice does a workshop essentially on the competition in residential real estate. 2008 was the previous one. 2018 was the latest one. There's always something that comes out of these workshops that the DOJ wants to see. And then NAR goes in and negotiates some terms, and we have a quote unquote, new set of terms or settlement on the investigation, and we move forward. That's really the starting point of where all of this began. In 2019 is when the first of the 3 cases were filed. There are 3 major class action cases. There are a lot more now, which we'll talk about copycat cases in just a moment. But there were 3 cases that all originated around the same time frame. So No-Select, Morel, and Burnett. Burnett is what we'll talk about today because that's the one that everybody knows about down in Missouri. What is important to understand here contextually is when that investigation occurred in 2018, they held this joint workshop. A bunch of people come in, NER comes in, a bunch of industry people come in and talk about the problems with residential real estate. And that was in June. Later in the summer, the DOJ opened an investigation on NAR MLS rules, specifically around the starting point of our rule base of unilateral offer of compensation in the MLS. So the idea of when you list a property in the MLS, you have to offer compensation on the other side of the transaction. It's been this way for a very long time. Everybody here on this line is educated enough to understand why it's there. To be clear, it could have been $1, but that unilateral offer of compensation was required in the MLS. The DOJ opens up an investigation. Later in November of 2020, NER and DOJ settle this investigation and is specifically around this unilateral offer of compensation. NER institutes the CCP, so everybody understands what that is, the Clear Cooperation Policy. This is the crux, by the way, of what really set everything off for these cases and the background and really where we are today. So CCP, Clear Cooperation Policy, is when you have a property and you list a home and you're a member of the MLS, you have to put it in the MLS within 24 hours. The reason for CCP was to stop essentially double-ending deals and not putting properties on the market. I've been very transparent. I agree with the premise of this policy. It's designed to make sure the seller's getting maximum exposure through the MLS, which is a good thing for them. But when you take it this way, and I'm going to summarize this, Howard, real fast for everybody to look at, when you take all of the policies that are in place currently in our industry today as a whole is where we've gotten ourselves into trouble. Independently, they make sense. Collectively, it leads up to what the plaintiffs are calling a conspiracy. Here are the 5 things that essentially started this domino effect of where we are. The first is that most MLSs, 98% of them, are governed by the National Association of Realtors. So they set the policies of what the rules are in MLSs nationally. There are pros and cons to that. The cons we just realized, we're going to talk about that in a minute. The pros is sort of a national guidance for how things are done. The second piece, part of the equation, large brokers are involved in the National Association of Realtors in the plaintiff's terms through agents being part of committees. It's a stretch, but essentially this is what they're claiming. Because large brokers have membership in the National Association of Realtors, they're claiming that NAR is setting policy by the membership. And if you take this one piece, if you have a unilateral offer of compensation in the MLS, a requirement to provide compensation to the other side, and the brokerages that were named represent 40% of the industry, 40% of the time when you list a home and you're offering compensation, it will benefit the brokerage on the other side of the deal, which was part of the defendants. So you have NAR governance, brokers being part of NAR, essentially. You have a unilateral offer of compensation, and now add the 4th piece in, Clear Cooperation Policy. Basically stating, if you get a listing, you have to throw it on the MLS within 24 hours, now thereby guaranteeing an offer of compensation on the other side of the deal. That's the conspiracy part when you add them all together. And then the 5th and final piece is they're using our commission rates here in the United States compared to the rest of the world. We have the 3rd highest commission rates in the world. And they use, they were comparing us to countries like Australia and how things are done differently there, basically saying that we've propped up compensation. I'm going to stop there, Howard, see if you have any questions. That's the sort of formation of where we are at this point in time. There's a couple other comments, but then I'll take us to where we are.
It's good to know that we're just in 3rd place, right? They should have just used the defense. Well, if you're not first, you're last.
I mean, it's funny to me that one of the things they were using was Australia. And for those of you here who do not know how real estate operates around the rest of the world, Australia doesn't do as much buyer representation. It's mostly done via auction, literally like out on the front lawn, and you go out.
I think
and
it's
they're auctioning
Australia, New
across.
Zealand, England. I mean, not it's amazing. There's no buyer representation, just
The reason that
Yeah.
their fee structure is lower is because there's only one agent involved,
Yeah.
right?
So
You don't have, it's an inferior system because our system and the other ones that are comparable in cost to the system we use here in the US are systems where most of the time you've got your advocate representing you, looking out for your best interests. You have a true fiduciary relationship. And so that means two parties got to get paid. So that is why our rate is higher.
And also there's two, you're actually having representation on both sides. But let's be honest, everything's more complex here in the US. You can thank California, for those of us out here, for the significantly sized contracts and disclosures that continue to get larger across the country. It's the comparisons are just apples and oranges. There just doesn't work. And the irony of it is last month in France, they had an international MLS forum to talk about how to take the very system that the lawyers are currently wanting to break down to the rest of Europe. They're literally brought people out from Danae came out, other representatives came out to France to speak about the MLS system we built here to mimic that across the rest of Europe. So the irony of this is, look, Keith and I aren't shy about the fact there are things that need to change, and there are some changes that we do think overall will be good for the industry. But let's not negate the fact this is a straight up money play by the lawyers. Like, this wasn't some seller randomly got in a room and then realized that they were thinking that they were being screwed out of something. These were lawyers that put these things into their minds. And I'm going to give you two other comments that are important for context, Howard, before we move forward.
Yep.
There's two other things here that are incredibly important to this discussion around these lawsuits, and we're going to dig into lawsuits in a second. So back in the summer of 2021, most people don't even know this, the Cato Institute, which ironically is a libertarian think tank, did an anti-competition in buying and selling homes. They did a research study on it. And what they actually talked about in this study is essentially that, and I'm going to quote this, the most problematic of these rules is the requirement that sellers predetermine, before even knowing the buyer, the commission paid to the buyer's agents. In this study, this constitutes a time practice which fixes brokerage prices and stifles competition. This study came out in 2021, and most people actually never read this. I want to give you the time frame here. This is the summer of 2021. July 9th of 2021, the Biden administration, it's not a political statement, this is actual factual information, by the way. The Biden administration signs an executive order called the Promoting Competition in America Economy Plan. I'm going to read this verbatim. Section 5, further agency responsibilities. This is basically about giving the FTC authority. I'm going to explain this now. To address persistent and recurrent practices that inhibit competition, the chair of the FTC, in the chair's discretion, is also encouraged to consider working with the rest of the commission to exercise the FTC's statutory rulemaking authority. Section 6, unfair time practices or exclusionary practices in the brokerage or listing of residential real estate. Why I'm sharing this is extremely important. We're going to talk about the class action cases in just a minute. There's also the Department of Justice investigations that are currently going on right now that NAR is fighting with them. And there's also the Federal Trade Commission, which is sitting on the sidelines watching these class action cases with complete statutory authority to come in and rewrite the rules if they so choose. So why I'm laying these three pieces out is when we get to this, there is almost zero chance that the industry is going to look the same as it did in September of last year on a go-forward basis. The question we're going to talk about is, what does it look like? Because not only would we have to appeal these cases, which we'll get to, win the fight with the Department of Justice, and you'd have to have literally a change of administration, whichever way it goes, pull back authority of the FTC to change the way that they want to see the industry operate. So what I'm trying to explain to the industry, what Keith and I have been microphoning is, changes are coming. It doesn't matter essentially how these class action cases go. It does, but there's more stuff on the sidelines nobody's aware of that are coming down the pipeline to change our business. So
Well, let's be honest, right? Like I know NAR is going to appeal, and I'm 0% bashing NAR, though we could spend some time doing that if that sounded fun. But NAR, like the industry lost already, period. Right? We took the L. We went to court and we lost. Now we can appeal, but there is, I guess I won't say zero because anything's possible, but there's a near zero chance, very, very close to 0% chance that our industry looks exactly the same. We're already seeing changes, local MLSs changing their rules and regs. You're going to continue to see change in and around compensation and representation as the outcome of this. It's just a question of speed. Is it in 2 months or 2 years or some other indeterminate time?
Yeah,
Well,
so I
and-
think
and
we agree that because I know you guys have said this to me before, you're not going to sit here and tell everyone like you know exactly how this is going to play out.
no,
You don't. What I think I'd like to get to, and I know Ethan, I think you want to chime in here as well. We'd like to get to is what do you see as the kind of sort of most likely array of potential outcomes,
yeah,
sort of going forward from good to bad to ugly. And then we're going to get to like, what's the point of this webinar? The point of this webinar is to give our community that's here and spending their time with us some ammunition, right? Ethan, did you want to jump in with something?
You already teed up where I wanted to go on behalf and part of a Q&A question from Jim, which includes copycat lawsuits, timeline, et cetera. But I think when we get to the practical stuff, this is now a comment. There's no reason to wait until all of this has been legislated to go where we need to go anyway in service of our consumers and in service of our business. So, timeline, I think, is where we are.
Yeah.
Most of the things we're going to talk about when we get there for changes in how you do your business would benefit your business
now,
regardless of zero change. Right. So we'll get there in a couple minutes once we finish talking about the doom and gloom. But
but it's not doom and so that's, I think it's a Keith, your comment's valid, but I think it's important to understand we don't want this to sound negative. Keith and I are actually like we think we have a pretty good grasp on where this is going to go, which is why we're sharing this with everybody. And we also are excited about it because here's the deal. As I explained these potential outcomes, the people that are good at their job are going to thrive even more. And I will make this statement now, and I have zero problem standing behind it. I think good agents will actually make more money in the near future based upon some of the stuff that's going to happen.
Wow.
I have no problem
I want to hear about that. I like the sound of that.
Because as I get into this, you're going to be in more control of your conversations with buyers. As an example, you'll be able to work with them on setting what you feel your comp is worth, not predetermined by another agent in the MLS offering whatever and then having to explain the difference. Like, I think good agents are going to get better at what they do because we're going to be forced to grow, have better conversations, articulate value. And candidly, and this isn't meant to be an asshole statement, there's going to be a lot less agents, which is going to make better agents do their job better too. So to me, I think there's some really interesting stuff that we are going to come out of this. Let me give you where this can go. I think everybody understands we had a massive blow in the trial in October. Candidly, we've been rooting NAR on, we've been rooting the defendants on, but Keith and I have always been in the camp we were going to lose. I'll give you the reason, and I'm not going to explain it. You can read it yourself. It's based upon the fact this case was a per se case versus a rule of reason case. When the judge made that determination, it was already an uphill battle to win this, which is why we've been out there saying this is likely not going to go the way we want it to go. Here's where we're at. So we have a judgment amount of about $1.78 billion. That's just for the state of Missouri. It's a treble damages is what typical antitrust cases are. So it would be 3 times that. The judge has the discretion to go to that full amount or anything in between. NAR and defendants will have to post a bond in order to appeal. The judge can determine what that bond amount is. To be clear, typically the judge will try to find something that works for everybody. They don't want to see a trial go through appeal for 5 to 7 years and the plaintiff is being dragged out. They also don't want to bankrupt the defendants either because that solves nothing. So the judge is always going to play a balancing act in this process. The problem where we are now is we have this case that's happened, and now everyone's familiar with all the copycat litigation, which Keith and I have been saying was going to happen. It's what's been occurring. You're seeing a bunch of ambulance chasing lawyers across the country filing cases to get in line for a payout. They're suing the wrong people half the time. It's a total joke. Right now, there's a motion to consolidate these cases into one under Missouri. I think my opinion, again, I'm not your lawyers, you'll see that occur because the courts don't want to see all of the courts tied up all over the country with similar cases. That's actually a pro and a con. The pro of that is if it's condensed, which I'm going to get to, you're working with less plaintiffs for a settlement. So that's a plus. It's easier to settle a case, and with all of these cases being condensed, it's national in scope. That's also a plus for the industry. The negative is it's in Missouri, and this judge hasn't been very favorable towards our industry. So we're dealing with a pro and a con with those two pieces. What you're going to see, what's happening now is NAR is saying they're going to appeal. You saw a motion today filed by Home Services and Keller Williams and NAR that they want a retrial. Here's the problems with that. Even if they were to get a retrial, and they were to manage to get it to be a rule of reason case, you can look this up yourself, versus a per se case, you're still in the same court with the same judge going through a trial with a jury that's already had this massive PR campaign. And let's be honest, the press releases on our industry have not been favorable for the past 4 months, including yesterday. Like, the port of public opinion is, in my opinion, we have lost. Mm-hmm. Secondly, if you appeal, this could take 3 to 7 years to appeal. And the problem that the whole industry needs to realize, which is happening very quickly, is every single company that's getting sued in copycat litigation still has to defend itself. That's attorney's fees, defense costs, interrogatories, depositions, like all of that. And we're not exactly in the best real estate market. So, there's going to be pressure for a settlement to occur, which, Howard, leads me to my comment. How do I think this will play out? I genuinely think a settlement will occur. It has to occur. The reason why is you can't have all these brokerages defending themselves. You can't tie up the courts. The plaintiffs aren't stupid. They're not dumb. They realize that this is a crappy economy. Real estate companies are what we call brokerages, or the first part broke. And so the reality is there's only
settle. The lawyers don't get paid. The lawyers got to get paid.
Right. Okay. Really important part I want everybody to recognize here. This is super important. So as you all know, Remax and Anywhere have a proposed settlement that's not finalized, but it's working through the courts, and it's been approved. It just has to continue to work through the process. All three lawyers and all three plaintiffs got in the same room and agreed to a settlement amount of half of the cash that those companies had, roughly. Okay. What that means is they're all talking and they're going, we don't want to bankrupt the companies. We want to get money. And they're willing to do that. So they've already signaled they're willing to settle these cases. And which is why I believe that the best scenario possible is a national settlement in scope, where we basically bring everybody into the class. What that means is every home seller and every buyer, because there's the Batten cases that are out there as well. I don't want to get too deep on that, but there's two sides. Come into the settlement. There's a certain amount of money that's paid out, and everybody gets $1 and moves away because there's not that much money to go around. So and the way these class action settlements work is you're automatically entered into them. You have to remove yourself from it if you wanted to go file your own separate litigation, which no one would take that case, because once a national settlement occurs, everybody's done. So I personally believe
explain that, James. Explain that to the audience, because we get that question a lot.
Yeah.
So two questions. One is, why, when there's one national settlement, is it all done? Two is, I'm going to put you guys in the spot. I know you don't know the answer, but I want to hear what individually, James and Keith, you individually, what are your predictions for when this thing settles? So question one, why does the national class action settlement end the whole thing?
Yeah. So what happens is when you have a national settlement of a class, everybody is entered automatically into it. So everybody here has a cell phone. You've received some card in the mail saying that you're part of a class action lawsuit for Verizon. You didn't even realize you were, but you bought a cell phone during the time frame in which this claim occurred. Same thing here. You bought a house or sold a house in the same time frame this occurred. You would have to remove yourself from the class if you wanted to go file separate litigation. The key point here, Howard, is it's very important. There's not a lawyer that's going to take that case, because if you have a majority of everybody settled out, there's no money left to sue for. So pretty much nobody takes the time to remove themselves from the settlement and then go file
No
another
more
case.
copycats after that.
Correct. It's pretty much done at that point. And so why that's important to understand, why I stand behind this comment, is if NAR appeals this and drags it out for 3 or 5 years, there won't be much of an industry left, because the brokerages don't have that kind of cash to defend themselves for 3 years and go through this entire process. Either they'll all settle out with the best way they can. A lot of small brokerages will get gobbled up. And what you'll be left with is the exact opposite, ironically, of what the DOJ wants, which is just a lot of large companies and very few small players. So if you just look at the tea leaves, it makes sense for a settlement to occur in this process. I'll stop there for questions before I explain sort of the next step.
Keith,
Yeah.
we're going to write this down and we're going to see how close you are. When is the settling? How much time?
Well, okay, so I'm going to give a vague answer, because my truthful answer is I have no effing idea, right?
No, no, you don't.
So
We're having a little fun here.
yeah, for sure. So I think it's measured in months, not years. Now, I do understand that 24 months is 2 years, so I give myself a hedge there. But
no. If it's measured in months, not years, then you're saying 12 months or fewer.
I think that is likely. I might ask for 12 to 18 months. Because
Keith, you're on the record. 12 to 18 months. James, what do you got?
I think less than 12 months.
Nice. All right.
I do. The reason I say that is there's a lot of growing pressure on. So as more and more, there's comments here, as more and more brokerages get sued, and candidly, for whoever's asking that, small brokers are being named the same as large brokers at this point. So there isn't rhyme or reason for it. As I said, you're going to have to defend the case regardless. So I think there's more and more pressure as these copycat cases come down to settle. By the way, that's the lawyer's tactic, to be clear. Sure. That's what they do. So a settlement is the easiest way out of this for everybody. And look, we just need to, and I'm going to get to this now, we need to accept the loss column, in my opinion. And we need to go, all right, how do we move this industry in a way that we're giving some, and we're making sure we're making sure that things are in place that need to protect the consumer. We need to stop so much about protecting us. We need to go, it is important. As an example, I think it is absolutely imperative in an MLS, there is an ability for a seller to offer a credit or whatever they want to do in a real estate transaction as part of that process. These are things we're going to fight about with the Department of Justice and the plaintiffs. But I 100%, and we'll talk about this momentarily, the unilateral offer of compensation in the MLS is done. I'm going to let that sink in. It's gone. It's simply a matter of time. The DOJ has indicated that in all of their briefings.
Say that one again in case someone was,
You being able to offer, so let me break that down further. You sitting down with a seller, charging them X as a compensation and splitting that or offering compensation to the buyer's agent through the MLS will eventually be done. That is, in my opinion, 100% going away. That is simply a matter of time. The MLS is about cooperation. I think you will see an outcome that looks like this. You will sit with a seller. You will talk to them about your services. You will tell them what it requires in compensation. They'll agree to that. You're going to get paid by the seller, and the buyer's agent is going to sit down in this new world and talk to a buyer and have a kind of conversation about the services and what you do and what your fees are for those services. That does not mean that a seller can't offer something through the MLS, but it would be direct. It would be, I want to offer whatever as a compensation to the buyer's agent, or to pay for the deck, or a 2-1 buy down, or whatever. I believe firmly there will be a field in the MLS for the seller to offer something directly to the buyer or the buyer's agent as an example, but not through the listing agent any further. That day is coming. I'm very convinced of that. That will be part of the settlement.
Got it. Let me ask, here's a question from left field. Keith and James, do you guys fundamentally differ on, is there any part of this in terms of what you think might happen where you guys have a little bit of a different view from each other? I didn't prep him for this question.
I don't fight him very much because he's got a mean left hook. So usually it's over Zoom.
Yeah, you don't want to mess with Keith, man.
No,
you don't want to mess with Keith. All right, think about that.
I think we Where we usually disagree is
Yep.
on severity or duration, but not outcome.
Got it.
So,
You guys are, you guys are squarely in the same camp on this one.
Couple
So,
couple things from chat real quick.
Yep.
One, Danny is sharing that this is already the case in commercial.
Correct.
great comp for
Great
there's a
comp for how
model
this will work.
to look to. I want to roll up like 3 questions here just before we move, because we're right on the edge of getting to the way the industry gets better, and frankly, the way that we win the court of public opinion in the future.
yeah.
Because I have some opinions about how we wound up, like and sure this is in the way you're talking about the case went forward as per se or not per se. I forget
Rule
which
of
one it was.
reason versus per se. Yeah.
Right. Which is serving people in a more transparent way, and being able to demonstrate your value and being able to articulate it in the first place. I think there are a number of benefits to going that road. But just on behalf of some independent brokers here, they're wondering, like, if there is a national roll up and there's some mass payout in a settlement, will it? I think they want to know, should I be financially planning for any kind of a damage if I run my own small independent brokerage or similar?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So this is completely speculation, by the way.
Of course,
Just
yes.
To be clear,
As you said off the top of this whole thing.
Yeah, I don't know these answers, but the way that I would see it going down is like this, and I'll explain my reasoning. I think, so I say this lightly because after NAR's news yesterday, it really irritates me. However, the industry has to be very mindful about what the National Association of Realtors does in many ways, and certainly things it needs to fix. But there's a benefit here for NAR handling a national settlement. The reason is NAR has the ability to do a dues assessment where they can say, we're going to try, I'm making up a number here, but we can do a dues assessment of $500 per member per year over 4 years, and we can come up with $2 billion to pay the plaintiffs. That's really important because what you have to understand is the plaintiffs don't want to sue 120,000 brokerages and go through the legal process of trying to do that. That's not financially makes any sense. NAR is the key to all of this, ironically, which is why I keep telling everybody, be very smart about your decisions with NAR right now, because we actually have to be supportive of it. They can go in and say, we'll do a deal, and the brokerage community will rally behind it so that, candidly, and I know this might offend some people, look, everybody knows agents make almost all the money. Brokerages don't, like, newsflash. Your splits show you make a majority of the income. So brokerages can't front the bill for all of this, or they'll have to file bankruptcy. It's as simple as that. So there's going to be some level of broker participation and agent participation in this process. And what I think it will look like is the industry goes, we'll agree to a national settlement. Here's the number. NAR does a dues assessment. The brokers kick in some capital in some way, shape, or form. We create this national settlement. Plaintiffs get a few bucks because it would be a lot of people with a small amount of money, and we move forward with that. The plaintiffs will want this because to them, they don't have to deal with individual settlements everywhere. They're dealing with one settlement, one solve. I think that's how this rolls forward. What has to happen here, though, is this. If you did that, it would be a stipulation that you're an NAR member, and then you pay the dues fees. And if you're an NAR member and are paying the dues fees, you're covered in the settlement. If you're not, then you're open to further litigation because you weren't part of the remedy. So why we're continuing to advise everybody in our organization and all of our peers, do not make rash decisions or knee-jerk reaction decisions on NAR, because you may want them to be the person to help you get this thing out. Because trust me when I make this comment to everybody listening, if it was $2,000 that you had to pay over 4 years, write that check every single moment of your life. Because if you've ever been sued, that's the first phone call with an antitrust lawyer is $2,000 per hour. Like, this isn't a thing where it's like, oh my God, that's a lot of money. It's actually like, write the check and walk. That's a huge benefit. So
James, based off some of the questions, I think we can clarify a couple things. So the class action lawsuit, basically, depending on which ones you're looking at, there are two or several, some representing
15.
sellers. Yeah, some representing sellers, some representing buyers. But it's basically that the fact that this wasn't able to be negotiated is why it's wrong. So it isn't about the MLS or about NAR per se. That's part of how their conspiracy theory. But as far as liability, quote unquote, it's anyone who's represented depending on the case, a seller or a buyer.
Yes, so it's on the Burnett side, the case that we lost. The answer is this: basically, the class is based upon sellers stating that agents overcharged them compensation because they had to pay the buyer's agent.
Which means if you sold a house, if your firm sold a house, then your firm is part of affecting the class.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
on the buy side, which is, not to go too deep here, but on the Batten side, which is the case, it used to be formerly known Leader, now it's called Batten. It's the reverse. Buyers are suing. You guys are all going to laugh at this, but buyers are suing, saying that the buyers overpaid because, quote unquote, the compensation is built into the price of the house, and that because we're charging both sides, they're getting screwed on one part of the deal. So basically, the sell portion of the compensation they got screwed on. So they're basically arguing different. They're literally the opposite arguments from two different classes in the conversation, which to me is really funny. But
so
let's move the conversation to.
well, that's actually what I want to do, Howard, real quick, if it's okay. You just give me 2 minutes, right? Because I see the comments in the chat are, it's an R problem, not a me problem, or if I'm a small broker, or is there insurance that could cover it, or right? All good, valid questions. The truthful answer is we don't know yet, right? No, I don't think insurance will cover it. There is no way your E&O is going to say that this is covered. You'd have to read your policy to make sure. Like, this isn't part of the problem with talking about something early is you don't have all the answers. So when James and I first started talking about this eight months ago, people thought we were nuts. Like, you're crazy. This isn't even going to happen. It'll take years, right? And so you're getting this information before it's all concretized. And the reason for that is so that you can start to prepare your business. James and I are talking to you about where we are today in a lawsuit that was lost, that is currently on appeal, that could go all the way to the Supreme Court, theoretically, with all these copycats, and who the hell knows. But one thing I feel very strongly, so does James and most of the people that we talk to, is representing a buyer on the other side of this will look different. So the companies and the agents and the teams who position their business the right way now, which is what we're about to transition to, Howard, that start to affect the change, then you get to run the race. When the starter gun goes off, some percentage of the industry is going to be trying to figure out what to do. There will be teams, agents, companies who have already started running that race. So when the starter gun goes off, you're at a dead run. You're not coming out of the starter's blocks.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is prepare you to set up your business for being at a run so that you get a competitive advantage when everyone else is coming out of the blocks.
Okay, so going forward here today, because as everyone knows, like, I obsess, whether it's a live conference or a webinar, that the people who made the commitment to take, time out of their day to be with us, something out of it and said, shoot, man, I'm really glad I went to that conference, or I'm really glad I went to this webinar today, right?
Yeah.
So I have two questions. One, I think you can nail pretty quickly, and the other one I really want to spend some time on. The first one is there anything that could possibly happen in the environment that would help our buyer agents? In other words, the mortgage industry is able to rewrite some statute where we can amortize a buyer agent commission in the loans. Two, something, James, Keith, and I have talked about, which is what will happen in the states where, more and more states might mandate, like, if you're a buyer, you must have, an agreement with an agent, which could be really good for agents. So what are a couple of things that can happen in the environment that will be great for our community?
Yeah.
We don't control that, so let's not spend too much time on it, but let's at least understand that. But then also let's get into what can I do as a buyer agent or as an agent today, get into those tangible takeaways.
So I'll take the first part, and then Keith will pull up some documents that we're just going to share with our playbook that we've done with our people since September. And we'll just it's going to look NextHome, and I apologize, but we're just going to literally show you our playbook because we've been preparing our entire company for this. Our people have all been retrained already on this process. So while Keith does that, I'll simply say two things. I think you're going to see a future where you will have the buyer will have the ability to finance, if not all, some portion of the agent's compensation in the loan. Yes, I understand VA needs to change. I understand all those regulatory things that need to go through. I can also tell you that is already being worked on. Like
Wow.
that's happening. Those things are occurring already behind closed doors with Fannie and Freddie, and those conversations have started. By the way, I'm not this huge NAR advocate. I'm just realistic. That is also a benefit of the National Association of Realtors because they have the political clout to do that stuff. So they've got some X's in their column. They've got some pluses too. That's a reality. While Keith talks about this, you're going to look at it. The commercial real estate analogy someone made is almost exactly how you have to think about this. It's going to become a negotiation tool. In fact, Keith, why don't you just pull it up and take us through some of these things? I think it's really the key part we want to do is give everybody some very strategic things to prepare right now in this process so that you know exactly what you can do across your organization. So Keith, why don't you jump in?
Sure. Look, the first step in any process is you got to identify where you are. So when we say dig into your company's data, we mean if you own a brokerage, awesome, dig into your broker. You own a team, awesome, dig into your team. You are an individual agent, cool, dig into your individual statistics, but see where you are in time and space. The buy side is the side that we believe will be most impacted. That's the one that's going to look different. How much exposure do you have? If you haven't repped a buyer in 3 years, your business will still be different, but not as different as someone who has 80% of their business being buy side representation. So you want to get clear on where you are and then start to train for what is coming next. And you can run comp. This is just us telling our people that it's important to do side by side. You want to compare how you're doing against the industry, how you're doing against your peers, how you're doing against your office. But really, this is where we're talking about the buyer broker agreement, in my opinion, will become mandatory in every state across the US on the other side of this. It used to be in 11 states. Now it's in 13, many states, 15 now.
Yeah.
Many states are talking about implementing a buyer broker agreement. Honestly, in my opinion, we should have had that a long time ago. It's a little weird, right? The fact that we could have met with a buyer and say something like, don't worry about it, it's free, or don't worry about it, the seller pays for it. That's not a fiduciary structure. That's not how we should be communicating with our clients. And but it's just not true, right? It's just not true. So a buyer broker agreement, I'm in California. We've had a buyer broker agreement in California for a really long time. No one uses it, right? Real estate agents, my experience of them in general is that they're brilliant humanists. You're really, really good at understanding what a human being needs in the moment to be shepherded through this incredibly stressful transaction. We aren't always as good in this industry at talking about how we get paid and what we get paid and why we get paid. And that is a skill that you're going to have to develop if the buyer broker agreement becomes a requirement. One thing I would take from this webinar, you want something active right now. Again, James nor I are your broker of record, but I would go print out. Yes, I said print, and not just because I'm over 50, but I want to carry that thing around. I want to look at my buyer broker agreement for my state. I believe very strongly it will be different on the other side, but just start to familiarize yourself with it. Because if you've never talked about it,
Are there any states absolutely mandating it, requiring it right now?
15 states require it now.
Required.
Yes, a lot of the states, I'm sure some of the people in the chat have had it for a while. It's just not a new thing. You'll see most states move towards this. I think you'll see eventually all 50 states. And the reason is it's actually beneficial to the buyer to have an understanding of who's fiduciary and what are the responsibilities I'm going to do for you. But it also is a benefit to sellers. We don't have a bunch of looky-loos coming through properties. What you have to think about is part of the outcome, and I'll let Keith jump onto the next piece. You're going to see, just like how Frank Dodd changed the mortgage industry, and there's a lot more disclosures about compensation and how everything works, you're going to see that occur here. We have to get very good at explaining what we do for the rates that we charge. And I think this is that growth part. Like, to me, this is just an evolution of really great agents are going to get better at their work. Crappy agents are going to have a hard time. So that buyer rep agreement.
One sec. Sorry, guys. But so many states have it. A lot of people pointing out in the chat that, yeah, they don't sign that until like the offer, really goes in, right?
Sure.
But I think, and I'm not the expert here, guys, at all, but like I think in Washington, the start of this year, it's different where when you start working with a buyer, have to actually get that agreement.
Correct.
And that's a bit of a, maybe you guys can get into that, a little bit of a game changer, right?
Correct. You're going to see most states eventually move to that. In fact, the lobbying of this stuff is ironically done through your state association. And it will eventually, in my opinion, which again, referring to association work here again, it will eventually end up being something where it's that first interaction. I think that's a huge part of it. So before you show a property in the MLS, by the way, MLSs could change that overnight if they wanted to. You have to have a buyer rep agreement in place. So that's, I think, where you'll see it go over the course of time.
Yeah, most states, and Robin nailed it. Most states have a significant, or when you have a substantive conversation regarding real estate, you should sign the agreement. Now, I also know there are norms that get standardized in cities that are different than the intended or state approach, right? Like technically in California, you're supposed to sign an agency agreement at first substantial contact, right? But no one does that. Like if you're telling someone the price of a home, that could be considered substantial. And so every time someone asks you the price, you should send them an agency agreement. The rules will get written, and then we will determine as an industry how we want to implement them. There are some people in states where it is not a requirement to use a buyer broker agreement, but they use it today right now because it's what they believe is the best business practice.
Yeah.
So what we want to help people try to widen the aperture is these changes are coming. What are the best business practices for me? And how can I take this change? There will be slow adopters to change and fast adopters to change. Fast adopters get a benefit. Slow adopters lose market share.
I mean, why would you take a listing without a listing agreement?
Yeah. Yeah.
So why would you take a buyer without a buyer rep agreement? Like, I mean, to me, I'm going to simplify it to that. And that's just really fundamentally what we're talking about. The irony of it is, if I were to ask anybody in this chat, if you think working with a buyer is more work than a seller, you probably would say yes. Yet we don't have them under an exclusive contract. That's insane to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
Keith, go next slide.
So buyer broker agreement is coming. Your buyer consultation, this is our internal tools that we use. You have your own. Your buyer consultation of tomorrow better look a lot more like your listing presentation of today. What I mean by that is when you go on your listing presentations, you spend energy trying to show the seller how you're different. You want to be differentiated. You want to provide massive value to the seller so that if they know, like, and trust you, and they know, like, and trust someone else, that they will pick you instead of that other person, right? Your buyer consultation of the future better start to do a lot of those same things. So leveling up your buyer consultation is not a bad thing in any market. It's going to be a requirement, in my opinion. It will be the part of the differentiator between the haves and the have-nots. The people who do their buyer consultation like they always have, as these changes start to come down, will lose market share. The people who really are thoughtful and tear their buyer consultation to the ground and rebuild it through the lens of providing massive value to the people that they serve, those are the ones who are going to make this change will actually feel like it improved their business, not like it hindered it.
Yeah. We're going to cover some of these comments in the chat in just a minute. We're going to explain to you how this will look and how you prepare. So
yeah, were there any? I wasn't looking at them. Anybody want to?
I am, but you're going to cover it.
A little bit of cynicism, but we're going to get to it.
Yeah, cool. I like cynicism. I can get to the next one. You may want to explore how you charge, right? There's the traditional percentage, flat fee. You got a flexibility, bulk. We're going to get to this more in later. There's two big things that I think are important. One is there's a whole segment of the marketplace where you never had to negotiate that you now are going to have to negotiate. So I got some books, we'll talk about some approaches, but for sure, there's now at least half your business, depending on what percentage you use, half of the available business was not negotiated before, that will now be negotiated. And you're going to have negotiation more rampant through the transaction because your offer writing process now will consist of how is the buyer's agent going to get paid. It will not be determined by the MLS. It will be determined by how you structure your offer. How you structure your offer and how you're going to get paid will probably look different if there's 25 offers than if it's been on the market for 125 days. And we'll unpack all of this. But the big piece here is you've got to start to think about, and I want to reiterate, we are not your broker of record. So work with your company to figure out how you want to approach this. But one big one is now part of every listing, because most of the time when someone sells their home, what are they doing? They're going to buy a house too. So especially if they're moving intra-market in the same market, you should, part of your new listing presentation of the future, which could start tomorrow, by the way, should be including a buyer broker agreement in that listing presentation. So you secure the buy side transaction at the time of the listing. I know when I used to sell, it happened to me, and it happens to our agents every day, and it's annoying, but how many times have you sold a house for somebody, but they're using someone else, or they end up using someone else for the buy inside your local market? That alone could increase your transactional volume in the spun forward 12 months. So when we say bulk, we mean linking. Every time I go on a listing presentation, I should also then have part of that be the buyer consultation, how I'm going to help them as a buyer, and securing that buyer broker agreement at exactly the same time.
Yeah. By the way, these 4 models you see here, I just to add context before we move forward, I still think in the future, traditional is going to be the common thing just because of what we'll talk about in a minute. But there's been lots of companies that have come out with flat fee models in the US. It's not a new actual approach. Purple Bricks was the latest to come to the US to try that, and it didn't make it. So I'm not convinced that is going to grow significantly. Flexibility in pricing, again, not a new model. Assist to sell, help you sell has been doing that for a long time. So my comment here is, I think if anything, you're going to learn that you just have to get very good at explaining and articulating what it is that you do, so that they can look at it and go, okay, I'm being charged this, but why, and what is it that you offer? And we'll talk about that in a second. So keep going.
Yep. I would go get the buyer rep, the accreditation. Those little letters matter. Does it matter to everyone? No. Will it be a huge differentiator? No. Is it something that could nudge you over the line? Yeah. I want any advantage I can get as the market shifts, simply so I can grab market share. Real estate negotiations expert. I would explore that at least. Harvard has a 1-week negotiations course you could take if you want a big Ivy League school behind you. Fine, you could go take that 1-week certification. At a minimum, go read these 3 books, please. I'm a pretty voracious reader. These are my 3 favorite books on negotiation. If you have your personal favorite, put it in the chat. But it's Getting to Yes, The Art of Negotiation, and Never Split the Difference, in my opinion, are the 3 best books on negotiation. Read all 3, read them twice in the next 6 months. We're going to have to get a more business mindset and get comfortable talking about how we get paid, comfortable negotiating with the other side when we're presenting offers. There's going to be layers of negotiation that we've never done that a lot of the agents that I work with, they're just not great at it. They are beautiful at serving people, at going over the home inspection report at 10 o'clock at night because they just found out the hot water heater and the roof are both shot, and how much are they going to cost? Like, you're so good at that. But when it comes to negotiating for yourself, I don't find as many agents have that same skill level. So this is one that we're pushing very hard, because you're going to have to get better at that skill. Should we switch to questions? Because I know we're getting close on time.
Well, let's go through these 2 things, because this is the meat of it. So this is an important part that I want to make sure that we dive into. In this future, you're going to have to talk to a seller about how the business operated previously. Remember, this isn't here yet, this is coming. And you're gonna have to explain to them, this is based on all these comments I'm seeing, that Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this is what I charge for my services. Now you're representing the seller. I also want to explain to you, and here's how I would pitch this to some degree, the buyer, because your house is likely to be purchased by a first-time home buyer, is going to be strapped for cash to be able to afford the house and the price of this property, because real estate prices have skyrocketed for the past 15 years. The way it used to be a month ago was we would collect a certain amount of money from you and remit compensation to the other side. That no longer exists. So expect, this is the lead in here, expect that the offer that is going to come across to purchase this property has a stipulation that you are to pay the buyer's agent's fee directly. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I want to help you understand that if for any reason the buyer cannot afford to pay the buyer's agent, and you aren't willing to offer a compensation to the buyer's agent, this deal will likely not exist. Now, as Keith mentioned, market conditions are going to vary these offers. This is the negotiation part in this whole thing, is this right here. But from a listing agent, you have to start explaining how compensation works, what the buyer's likely going to go through, that the agent likely has a buyer rep agreement in place with the buyer. They may not be able to afford it. And this is where everybody negotiates and brings money to the table. So as I mentioned earlier, it may be that the buyer can finance all of it, some of it, maybe none of it. We don't know. That's the part where the seller has to be part of this process. By the way, this is exactly how commercial real estate operates. This isn't actually anything new.
Well, and it's also exactly how residential real estate operates, with the exception of the commission. You have terms, standards in every one of your markets. Who pays for title and escrow or the attorney closing? Who pays for the pest inspection? Who doesn't, right? In every city across the country, there's norms. And when you're writing in a really competitive situation, you might cover some of those costs, or the buyer might be willing to take some of those costs. You might be willing to pay for an appraisal shortage. So you're used to putting all these terms in. One of the new terms that you are going to have to structure and negotiate now on the buy side, well, not now, but we believe in the future, will be your compensation. So it's one more term, albeit a big one, and a bigger number than many of those other ones, that you are going to have to negotiate. Because you're right. Someone in chat said this isn't negotiation. Buyers can't afford it. First-time home buyers can't afford it. You're right. So yeah, but not all first-time home buyers are built the same. It will get harder. This is not good, and it will get harder for your cash-strapped first-time home buyer. It is not ideal. That's why we're hopeful, and we believe, and I've heard rumblings, but nothing that we could quote, that conversations are going on between the industries, specifically the mortgage industry, to try to have the buyer to be able to finance it. Because someone else said earlier, like, this would obliterate, basically VA is going to have to change, or you couldn't do a VA loan today if this passed tomorrow.
All right, next slide. We're running out
So,
of time.
so what do you guys think is the, just again, opinion, what do you think is the likelihood that you do eventually see buyers being able to amortize the cost of the buyer agent commission in the mortgage?
The likelihood?
Yep.
I'm very confident that will occur.
But I mean, that, I think, and I could be wrong, I think that that's like kind of a game changer. I think it's amazing news, right? Because I mean, I've done the math, and on the sort of median priced home in the US, it's about like $28 a month, right? Over a 30-year loan. On an $800,000 home, whatever, it's $60, right? So that seems to me, and sorry guys, I'm a real estate MarTech guy, right? So I defer to you guys. That seems to me like it's a big win for us if that happens.
I think it is a very highly likely that will occur. I know that the advocacy team led by Shannon McGann over there is certainly working on that at NAR. I think the way this outcome goes, and there's a comment in here that buyer side agents go away. I actually disagree with that. They're not a commodity. I disagree with that significantly, because I think that we just haven't had to sit down and approach a buyer the same way we approach a seller. We don't have that muscle memory yet. But I'll make this argument. In 2021, every single person on this webinar that's an agent, you made almost nothing as a buyer's agent because you wrote 15 offers, showed that client 40 houses. Like, the amount of time that you would have spent working with that client, you were a charity event for them. Now, they don't know that though, because they don't know how long it takes to look at a disclosure package. They don't know how long it takes for you to meet with the agent and go, just all the work that you do. I think the problem, and Howard knows I'm very passionate about this as a project I'm working on, but like, I genuinely think the issue is that when we meet with a seller, go, here's all this stuff. Here's all the marketing material. Here's everything that goes on, et cetera. When we meet with a buyer, we haven't learned that muscle memory to explain how much work actually goes on, because again, I would argue you spend more time with a buyer than you do with a seller. And ironically, your fee isn't dictated by you in most cases, except some of you are good at it, but most don't. It's dictated by the seller's agent. So why I made that comment earlier I believe a world where you sit down with a buyer and get really damn good at what you do and explaining the amount of work that goes on. You're going to analyze that data and go, you know what? Shit, I'm spending a tremendous amount of time with this. I'm not doing that for X. I'm only going to do it for Y. And if you want to work with me because of my track record and how good I am at getting people's offers accepted, and you go down that road, you'll probably be able to charge more. I firmly believe that day is coming. And I don't know why it does that, by the way. I apologize. I can't turn that thing off in Zoom.
So James, can you comment a little bit on, you've got this exciting new project called Raise, and it really is there, to help the agents. Can you just talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, so fortunately, I've been involved in a new venture that's launching this year, actually in the next month or two. And you can just go to raise.com, RAYSE.com. In short, we've built a program. It's actually funded by the industry that is designed to create transparency for the consumer in every single thing the agent does. It literally, we track phone call log, we track time, we track mileage, we track activities, and it creates this collaborative experience so that the buyer can see everything that's likely going to occur, the 175 things you might be doing, when it happens in a real-time basis. And why I keep making this comment that if you saw how much work you do with a buyer, your mindset will shift. It is the most transparent thing yet in our business to show the value of what realtors actually do. It's been in development for almost 2 years. It's coming to market this quarter. There's a significant wait list to get into the program, but I would encourage people to go look at that. It's not just plugging it. It's literally backed by most people in the industry. That's a good opportunity for everybody to see sort of what we think the future of how interactions are between you and the consumer. And the final thing, go to the next slide, which I think is important, Keith, for everybody to see as well.
Let me just comment on that for a sec, James, which is, I'm married to a buyer's agent, and I know, living with her, like how much time she spends with her buyers, and the sheer number of hours, the effort, the care, the attention, everything. And if she has a tool where they can just see that, like they can
in real time
see that in real time. And then it comes full circle on the MarTech side, because she has such amazing reviews, that she's getting a lot of organic business through Google because of all these reviews that we're helping her, right? We're helping her, make sure that they're all really visible. But think about like that link to your reviews. Again, if everyone you've worked with, it's not just this holistically, oh, they were a good agent. It was like, oh no, like in the review, like my agent killed herself. Like,
yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this is the analogy I give, and then we'll wrap up with this here. I always say this because I think it's relevant. So I'm third generation in residential real estate, and when my mom moved out of her house, my dad passed away. We put her into a 55 plus community for just being able to do her thing. And the disclosure package for that community was 126 pages. 126 page disclosure package. And here's what the agent did. You're all going to relate to this right now. It was, one of my agents, and she was doing a great job. And she sent me an email that says, here's the disclosure package. I've read through it, and here's the things you need to know. Now, I did what every buyer does. This is the most important part of this entire conversation. I said, thank you so much. Look forward to talking about it tomorrow. And I filed it away. What I didn't do until 5 minutes later was realize that was 126 pages. And then I responded back and I asked the agent, how long did it take you to read that, just out of curiosity? And she said, I spent 6 hours last night going through that. And that right there is the problem. That's the problem. Because the agent spent 6 hours doing something. All I saw was the email. And in my brain, I'm equating to a 5-minute email she wrote, not the 6 hours she spent on it. If we as an industry get transparent on how much we actually do, and because I've seen data that no one's seen yet, it will blow your mind on how much money all of you are losing, on how much time you spend with clients when you start to see the numbers. Because we're seeing numbers of a buyer's agent will spend between 80 to 120 hours working with a buyer. Yet a study that we're going to come out with showed that most buyers think agents spend about 15 hours or less working with them. So that the dichotomy of like what people think versus reality is so fundamentally flawed. Transparency will be the key to it. I'll wrap up with that QR code. That's a document that NAR put together, which you should look at, the 172 things an average agent does. I would take that doc incorporate that into your buyer presentation, incorporate that into your listing presentation, get really good at explaining all of those things, because that's where you're going to start to help a buyer and seller go, damn, I didn't realize that you guys did all of that. And that's fundamentally where we're at. So
I'm going to read one comment, which I'm really excited about, which is from Mark, who said, short and sweet, this has been so great. Thank you so much for this. So thank you so much to Keith and to James. Ethan, kind of what are some of your thoughts, having listened to today's webinar? What are some of your takeaways and message to the group?
Yeah, I really appreciated just this picture that we can be out ahead of this. I think a lot of people can spend a lot of time getting into the details, but I think what you guys have done here today is paint the picture of like, where do we need to go from a practical standpoint to get ahead of no matter what happens? Because we established that a number of times today too. No one knows. We can guess. Some things are more likely than others, but ultimately, transparency wins. I think the more clear we are on our value and the better we can communicate that. I also like the idea of flexibility, perhaps in compensation structure. That gets to the theme of getting better at negotiation. But there are a lot of different ways to do this. At some level, several of these aspects are inevitable, whether you're forced or you do it by practice. I think everyone would favor the latter. And it's better for consumers. And so that's what's going to win in the end. And that's why I added in the chat myself, like this court of public opinion can be won one conversation at a time. And I think transparency is key to that. If people feel like they understand, and more people have great story, and a lot of people already do, but have great stories in their back pockets about, like yours, James, 6 hours reading that contract. Like when more consumers have that story in their back pocket to bring out anytime any of this stuff surfaces in any way, you don't win over a jury that feels like, they're getting this conspiracy argument put together. That was in the chat too, by the way, was conspiracy established.
yeah,
I think we all know where we land, but a jury that doesn't understand any of these details doesn't care. They go to like these, easier stories to tell themselves if they're not equipped with a better one.
we haven't done a good enough job of articulating what we do. This is a
Right.
growing opportunity. Like I don't fault, I mean, look, I fault the jury and the plaintiffs, but we had to make our case and we failed. We as an industry need to get very good about explaining what we do. And here's the thing, people will pay for it. They will. They're always willing to do it. Like that's just, Americans love to spend money on things they find value in. So in absence of value, this is the quote I'm going to leave with everybody. In absence of value, all you have is cost. If you show value, then you can negotiate fees that you're worth. It's really that simple. And I know I'm like boiling it down, but we have shown this, we've taught it. We have tons of people that are like, I've been using buyer rep agreements and I tell them what I'm worth and I explain everything I do. I never had an issue with it. It's like not even a big deal to them. So prepare now because this is where it's going to go. So
my parting thought is, our partners at Follow Up Boss and we at Ylopo spend every waking hour trying to arm our clients, and we have a lot of mutual clients, arm our clients with a competitive tool set so they can crush their competition. I'm a pretty competitive guy, and I know most of my clients are pretty darn competitive, and everyone on this call is, and I'm not shy about that. Like, I want my clients to crush their competition. Part of this is to motivate everybody to not put their head in the sand, to embrace change. Someone says here in the comments, I love it, chaos is an opportunity, but it's really change is an opportunity, right? Disintermediation is an opportunity. Disruption is an opportunity. And this is an incredible opportunity for our community to arm themselves with concrete tools, agreements, scripts, raise, all of these things that are coming your way, and embrace them so you can crush your competition, right? Don't put your head in the sand, embrace it. And, I'll come full circle to where, James and Keith are like, guys, you can actually, like the bad agents, this is going to disrupt them, right? But you guys who are serious about it, who spent time today with us to learn about it, what can you do, who embrace it, you're going to get more market share. It's that simple. It's an opportunity. So I'm going to sort of end there. Huge thank you. Everybody needs to subscribe to Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered. Ethan and I freaking love it. These guys are super on it. It's a really fun podcast. It's super informative. When I'm on a drive heading back to the desert, the first thing I'm looking for is the next edition of Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered. I love it. And just so humbled and thankful for Keith and James today, and how much time you gave to our community. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you
Our
guys. I
pleasure.
appreciate being here very
Yeah,
much.
for sure. Anytime.
Appreciate you.